Afternoon, everyone. So today, my name is 𝐆𝐴𝐞𝐿 Klaver. I'm going to be talking you through a little bit of my master's project titled Collaborative Conservation, Governance and Working Landscapes, a contextual analysis of 2 South African biosphere reserves in the Boland mountain complex, supervised by Dr. 𝐆𝐴𝐴𝐞𝐬 and Dr. 𝐍𝐞𝐿, and then Dr. 𝐾𝐧, who couldn't be here today. But more specifically, I'm going to be talking about the interpretation and implementation of the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Reserve program. This research is in support of the Governance in UNESCO Biosphere Reserves project, in which they are assessing the governance models implemented in 9 of South Africa's 10 biosphere reserves. But I just want to make clear that this is only preliminary results and reflecting the participant perceptions and reflections. So I'm just the messenger. So firstly, what are biosphere reserves? So biosphere reserves, So biosphere reserves came about in 1971 when they established the Man and the Biosphere Reserve program with the aim to reconcile the relationship between people and the natural environment through people-centered landscape conservation approaches, linking people with nature in the pursuit of sustainable socio-economic development. So this program is played out in biosphere reserves across the world, in which there are 738 in 134 countries. And they serve 3 complementary functions, including conservation, development, socioeconomic development, and logistics, including education and research. And they are implemented through a zonation system, which includes the core areas, which you can see in the green, buffer areas in the yellow, and transition zones, which are your urban environments transitioning into your more healthy ecosystems. And in the South African experience, we've got 10 biosphere reserves across the country, 5 of them in the Western Cape, and approximately covering 10% of South Africa. And so they have been termed open sky laboratories to test sustainability science issues and to share this knowledge across networks in which there are thematic networks, regional networks, and global networks. So biosphere reserves are multi-use working landscapes, which are by nature complex, adaptive, social, ecological systems. There are large mosaics in the landscape with many multiples, and so there is this challenge of reconciling biodiversity conservation and human development. My methods for this part of the research were purely qualitative. I had an embedded multiple case study and purposefully sampled 20 participants, including board of directors and the executive management teams, as well as went over some of their guiding documents. All of this data was put into Atlas TI, where I stored it, coded, kept the audit trail. The data, I used the thematic analysis, Braun and Clark, and my study site is the Boland mountain complex, which there is the Kogelberg Biosphere Reserve and the Cape Winelands Biosphere Reserve. So here, the dark green areas are the core protected areas. In this part of the world, they are mostly Cape nature sites and municipal nature reserves. Then we've got the buffer areas, which is the lighter green. In this region, mostly commercial plantations, forestry or forestry exit areas. And then we've got the transitional zones. In the Kogelberg, it's 𝐵𝐺𝐵 and 𝐿𝐺𝐵, known as the valley, the coastal villages. And then in the Cape Winelands Biosphere Reserve, we've got some biggish towns, Stellenbosch, Paarl, Wellington, Franschhoek. So specifically this presentation is more about understanding the roles and challenges of these biosphere reserves and their stakeholders. So my 2 objectives were to explore the envisioned role in the landscape and explore stakeholder involvement and what those relationships entailed. These were the specific questions which I asked participants, which is how they saw the role of the biosphere reserve in the landscape at present, what the main challenges for the biosphere reserves are in the landscape or to fulfill their role, and if they could describe what success would be like, as well as who the stakeholders and stakeholder groups are, and if they could identify any critical relationships. And so what success would be like in these 2 biosphere reserves in the Kogelberg, it's about creating awareness and opportunities and empowering people. For them, it's biosphere living, knowing what that means, and spreading it through, or neighbor by neighbor, the snowball effect, as you can see there, creating jobs and equipping people with skills and knowledge. They would like to be a model site for developing, or for sustainability and developing custodians. There's a quote that says, this Biosphere Reserve is meant to be a model for showing other areas how people can coexist with nature. And they would like to be an umbrella organization with a network of stakeholders and to be a place where authorities and people actually work together and who speak to each other. And so in the winelands, also about education, healthy natural environments, training, green jobs. Here it's about having people connected to well-functioning ecological spaces and systems, enjoying them, using them recreationally and spiritually, and finding sources of livelihoods within the sphere of green jobs. And they would like to have well-functioning schools with environmental questions integrated into their curriculums, as well as being recognized in the communities and being able to coordinate the various actors in the landscape, and then, of course, the sustainability of the Biosphere Reserve. So the role of the 𝐾𝐽 Biosphere Reserve at the moment, on the right-hand side, you can see there's the Western Cape Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, 𝐑𝐴DP. We've got the Overberg District Municipality, Overstrand, 𝐆𝐵𝐼𝐍, and the City of Cape Town as the 3 local municipalities, and then Cape Nature, which oversees probably around 60% of their reserve. So those are all critical partners to the Biosphere Reserve, and they see their responsibility as kind of bringing all those together. As one participant said, it's the power to convene. So the 𝐾𝐽 Biosphere Reserve Company, they can get funding for very specific projects, they can get projects going, but they would like to have people in the landscape take ownership, champion the project, and for them it's about bringing the big ideas and the strategy. And so they also have a role in conservation, and this is largely through supporting existing conservation organizations and their activities. They nurture conservancies, of which there is the Pringle Bay, Royals, Beddy's Bay, Groenlandberg, and 𝐼𝐭. They work with the Botanical Society as well as the Harold Porter Botanical Garden in Beddy's Bay, and they have projects including the Garden Circle and plant rescue programs. Then there is several invasive alien clearing projects, which they have partnered with WWF, the Groenlandberg Water Users Association, and the Department of Agriculture's Land Care Program, all 3 of those seen as critical partners. They collaborate with Cape Leopard Trust and Cape Nature, and have recently launched the snare-free program, which is a province-wide snare response protocol. And then the 𝐾𝐽 also work with Wildlife Rescue South Africa and are currently in the process of building a rehabilitation center, and where they would like to offer education and training to wildlife first responders. They also have a role in socioeconomic development. They are a vehicle to introduce and create jobs. The Grabouw Development Association was established through the coordination of the Biosphere Reserve, and that is to address increasing inequalities and unemployment in the Valley region. They've also partnered with the Overberg District Municipality and the Aldrin Grabouw Cycling Association to employ forest rangers to patrol the forestry exit areas where there's a bit of lawlessness. And they work with Child Welfare South Africa, specifically the Kleinmond branch, to support youth in the area. They've also partnered with Grabouw Transformation to help NPOs in the area through supporting them with business plans as well as funding proposals. So the role of the Cape Winelands Biosphere Reserve, they've also got 𝐑𝐴DP at the top who they report to. They've got the Cape Winelands District Municipality, and then they've got 5 other municipalities, including Bredover, Stellenbosch, 𝐵𝐴DRkloof, Drakensberg, and Witzenberg. So they are big on support and facilitation. They align with government departments and fill the gaps where need be. The CWBR, they are a platform for networking, connecting everybody, and they want to find out who's battling and figure out how they can help them do better. And so all of these are actually critical partners, including communities, residents, landowners, because without them, a lot of their projects wouldn't be happening. Conservation at Work, they oversee all the conservancies in the area where a lot of influential landowners live, and then obviously the Fire Protection Association of the Winelands. They have a role in conservation as well, also clearing invasive alien plants with the Ida Valley Community Trails and WWF. Recently, they've also gotten more involved with science and research, specifically with UCT and Stellenbosch University and the African Climate and Development Initiative at UCT, in which they do baseline data collection with the use of drones. They have a Source to Sea project running in connection with UNESCO's Be Resilient project, and this is a citizen science project dealing with education around the hydrological cycle, as well as water quality monitoring. The winelands also have a role to play in socioeconomic development. Most of their focus has been education and community upliftment. They have international partners, including the Attorney Action Humanitaire and the government of Luxembourg, both of them critical partners and supply a lot of funding for their education projects. They are under the philosophy or under the understanding that education is the answer to many of our problems, because if you don't understand the problem, how do you solve it? But they also do a lot of education because of the disparity of education in our country. They work a lot with ECD schools, early childhood development. They build schools, they train teachers, and they do educational outings to 𝐍𝐞𝐿 museums. They also do hikes and camps on Cape Nature properties, and they have a mobile science unit called STEAMY, which is Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts and Maths for youth. So what are the main challenges for these biosphere reserves? Across them, there's this issue of government, specifically public officials not being particularly bothered about biosphere reserves. There's this perception that Western Cape biosphere reserves don't get support from national government. In the winelands, one participant said we don't have the leadership on top, and it's a top-down structure. Treasury doesn't want money to come to the Western Cape. And the technical committee, in which all of their critical partners are present, the authorities, they see it as just another meeting and a box to tick. They endure the meeting, as some participants explained. And even when public officials do attend the meetings, it's often a representative of the officials. In the Kogelberg area, we've got a challenge of cooperation and coordination. Particularly in the coastal villages, people tend to operate in silos, and there's a bit of territorialism in the area. And then also illegal activity and environmental concerns. There's a lot of poaching, specifically parlemoen, crayfish, snaring, and even clear-felling proteas in the heart of the Cape Floristic region. Fire is also a problem, specifically the municipalities' way of dealing with it, which participants have termed illegal and illogical. And then, of course, land invasions. Somebody was speaking about Knoflokskraal the other day. Awareness and challenges with communities. There are some people in the Kogelberg Biosphere Reserve that are particularly anti-Biosphere Reserve, and this is because of the association with the predecessor to the Kogelberg Biosphere Reserve company, CoBio, and they were largely environmental activists. Across the two biosphere reserves, there's still a lot of people that don't know what they are and what their purpose is. And then there's this modern culture, and particularly the youth, that are completely detached from the environment. The wineland side, again, not well known to the public. A lot of the communities are also gang controlled, which proves to be a challenge to them. And then also getting communities to understand the science and climate change and all these sorts of things. But of course, we know hungry stomachs don't have ears. And then a big issue is resources, particularly human resources and funding, but specifically operational funding. On the Kogelberg side, they have the absence of international community which would like to help them or contribute in their biosphere reserve, unlike winelands who have European partners. But yeah, as the participant said, you can get funding for very specific, clearly defined projects. But funding for promoting, for example, the Biosphere Reserve and developing the capacity of their office is a problem. And obviously they could do a lot more if they had a lot more resources. Funding on the wineland side as well. A lot of the people working with the Biosphere Reserve do it voluntarily. They do it for the love of conservation. And so the takeaway here is biosphere reserves are there to support and facilitate, to connect people across the landscape, to bring the big ideas, to identify weaknesses to address and to reconcile this challenge of biodiversity conservation and sustainable socioeconomic development. So if you're working within a biosphere reserve, perhaps work with the biosphere reserve to find ways to collaborate, connect to different networks, pool resources, and increase social ecological system resilience through boosting social capacity, functional and responsibility, and knowledge diversity, and innovation through experimentation and learning, as well as co-designing priority projects and research questions. But why? Because biosphere reserves operate at a landscape scale, as well as have global, regional, and thematic networks across the world network of biosphere reserves, as well as providing diverse hubs, considering they serve 3 complementary functions, and offer that neutral space to tackle complex problems. Just a thank you to NRF for making this research possible, the 2 biosphere reserves, Cape Winelands and Kogelberg, for participating in the study, the team, Bianca, George, and Kara, and then, thank you for your attention.